I lived with me mum and dad and 12 brothers in a big house at the bottom of a hill. We were the saddest family in the world. Great fat tears would meander down our cheeks all day. We held tin buckets under our chins so as not to soak our clothes. The noise of tears plinking into 15 buckets only stopped when we went to empty 'em in the yard. "Dad," I said one day as I paddled in a pond of our tears, "why are we so sad?" "Our sense of humour was stolen one night, Bert, when we was asleep." "But who'd do that, Dad?" "I don't know. The same person who stole all our farm animals, set fire to the barn and painted 'Why did the chicken cross the road?' on our front door. You were the lucky one. They left you with a smile." It were true. I couldn't laugh, but I was the only one in the whole family who could smile. Sometimes I smiled as often as twice a week. "So why did the chicken cross the road, Dad?" I asked. "Well, whoever it was painted on the door wrote, 'To get away from you lot,' underneath on the step." That night, in bed with my bucket, I wondered how to save the family. So I wrote a note. "Dear Mum and Dad, I've run away to become a detective and find the person who stole our sense of humour. Lots of love, Bert." Then something extremely strange happened. My lips started to swell up. There was a loud pop, and I felt like a plunger had been torn from a face. A little creature fell backwards onto the bed, a plump face on legs. It wore a tiny red hat and had the ruddiest cheeks I ever saw, and the biggest smile. "What are you?" I asked in astonishment. "Bayek, I'm your smile. I've jumped out of your skin to tell you your family's giggles, belly laughs and chortles didn't get stolen. They ran away. They were fed up of being in such dull, funless people. So one night, them mischievous humours let the animals go, burned down the barn and ran off to find a bit of crack in New York." "Hey, that's terrible," I moaned. "I know, I fancied Paris, so I stayed behind. And that's why I popped out of your face, to tell you, don't bother with that load of wasters in America. You'll never find them anyhow. We'd be much better off at the Eiffel Tower." I leapt out of bed and pulled on some clothes. "That's it," squeaked the little fat face, hopping up onto my shoulder as I crept downstairs, trying not to clank my pail. "The great thing about Paris is the Mona Lisa in the Louvre, the most famous smile in the world." The smile sat on top of me head as I let myself out of the back door and trudged down a dark road towards Cork. "Ho, ho, mon ami, when we get to Paris, we'll go straight round to Picasso's house and we'll get him to do a portrait of us." "I'm going to stow away on a ship to America," I declared. The smile lay on my head and peered upside down into my eyes. "Are you crazy?" "I'm going to find my family's sense of humour." The smile leapt off me head and landed in the road behind me. "Hold it!" I stopped and looked back in the gloom at his tiny red face. "I'm not going," it said. "Well, that's okay." I shrugged and walked on. The smile hopped after me. "They won't come back to some miserable broken-backed farm in the middle of nowhere when they're living it up in Brooklyn." I walked all the way to Cork, but stowing away weren't easy. After being thrown into the harbour for the 10th time in a week, I sat on the quayside and sobbed into my bucket until it overflowed. "Oh, let's swim to France instead," said the smile. At that moment, a large, rich-looking man walked past and stopped. "Hey, you look terribly sad," he said, "as if you've been crying all your life. I'll tell you what, I'm sailing off to America today and... You'll take me with you? I gasped. Nope, said the man. But you can have this ticket. To New York? Nope. For a show at the Opera House. I haven't time to watch it, but it's supposed to be funny. He thrust a ticket into my hand and walked on. It read, Mrs. Hoggerty and her hilarious pork pies. We arrived late at the Opera House. We took our seats in a dark theatre and heard a voice say, I'm Mrs. Hoggerty, and these are my pork pies. On stage was an enormous woman dressed in a red satin dress. She opened a box and a dozen round, shiny pastries with crimped edges leapt out. See these pork pies? They're so fresh. They're still jumping about. The pies leapt and danced about the stage. A pork pie is Cockney rhyming slang for a lie, Mrs. Hoggerty told us, and this lot are a right load of fibbers. She began grabbing the pies and asking them questions. Who are you? She'd ask.
George Washington,
the pastry would scream. Oh, that was a whopper. Each lie was bigger and sillier than the last, but it wasn't really what the pie said that was funny. It was the way they giggled hysterically. Their infectious, high-pitched giggles set everybody off. Mrs. Hoggerty was funny too. She could sing so low and jump so high in the air, and all with acrobatic pies leaping around her. I almost laughed myself. The Smile sat beside me, not smiling.
those pork pies,
It said thoughtfully at the end.
they were,
Funny?
that's right. There was something very funny about them. I mean, hysterically laughing pork pies. Makes you think, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, Smile. And do you know what it makes me think? I'll tell you. I think I should give up looking for my family's sense of humour. You were right. I'll never find them. I've decided I want to go on stage, be a musical performer. No going back to the farm for me. I want to make people weep. The Smile groaned, sat back and slapped his huge, happy face with his hand. I crept in the stage door and found Mrs. Hoggerty's dressing room. I knocked softly. No answer. So with the Smile in me pocket, I went in. Mrs. Hoggerty wasn't there, but tiny creatures, like the Smile, but odder shapes, were stood on chairs, climbing from pie costumes.
Who are you?
Gasped a giggly creature with a crumpled up face. Bert! Then I blurted out, Hey, you're my family's sense of humour.
I heck you shouldn't be spying on us. We're no pastry on,
said a belly with mouth and eyes. Mrs. Hoggerty came in and looked at me in surprise. We have a visitor.
Bert. He reckons we're his family's sense of humour. We're not at all. We're pork pies. We got left a bit long in the butcher's. Grew mouldy. Then grew some arms and legs.
You're telling fibs, I said. They all leant on each other and roared with laughter. You belong to my family, I said hotly. My Smile will back me up. Won't you, Smile? Smile? I searched my pockets. Smile was gone. Mrs. Hoggerty stared at me, eyes twinkling behind old-fashioned spectacles. Bert, tell me, why did you come in here? I blushed. I wanted to ask if you'd help me be a music hall entertainer. Oh, and what can you do? Well, I can cry into a bucket.
That's not comedy.
A giggle screamed.
That's tragedy, that is.
Shh! Scolded Mrs. Hoggerty. I think crying into a bucket would be a very delightful turn. Unusual. No one else has done it. But come back to my lodgings, show me your act, and I'll give you a few pointers. Tomorrow, you can show my manager, Mr. Pips. Then join our troupe as our warm-up act. That would be more fun than going home, wouldn't it? Her hotel rooms were large and plush. The giggles sprang, laughing all over the comfy chairs. A maid brought in food on a tray. "Do you want me to show you my act now?" I asked after the maid had gone. No, we'll have a bit of dinner first," said Mrs. Hoggerty. "I ordered a big pork pie for dinner. You like a bit of pork, do you?" "Oh, yes, it's my favourite," I said. "Really?" said Mrs. Hoggerty. "Then chew on this, Bert." And suddenly Mrs. Hoggerty leapt on me and pinned me to the wall by my throat with her hand. Only as I coughed and spluttered, I realised it wasn't a hand at all. It was a trotter. "That's right, Bert. Take a good look at me. My squinty little eyes, my big nose, remind you of something, do they?" "You're a pig," I squeaked. She gave a grunt. "Correct, Bert. You're pig. Rosemary. That night when your family's sense of humour escaped, they let out all the animals for fun. I was one of them. The humours all rode on my back, and as they rode off, they told me what would happen to me if I was ever caught. I'd be turned into a pork pie. She let go of my throat and took off her bonnet. She had pointy ears. Rosemary picked up a knife and a steel and scraped one against the other. But you won't ever get to tell your family you found me and their sense of humour, as I'm going to cook you in a nice bit of pastry." "You can't do that," I said. "I'm a person. Your family did it to my family. But you're just a pig. We're cleverer than you." She came towards me then, with the knife pointed at my throat. "So, you're not going to help me be a music hall entertainer?" I gulped. "No, Bert. You might say that was just one of my hilarious little pork pies." Then my dad burst through the door. "Bert! Dad, help!" "By heck, that's Rosemary, our pig." Rosemary dropped the knife and, with the humours clinging to her back, leapt out of a window. "She was going to turn me into a pork pie, Dad. But how did you know where to find me?" "Your smile went to the guards, and I got a lift up in the Riley's car." My smile was looking out of an open window where Rosemary had jumped.
"You won't catch her, or your sense of humour now."
But it didn't matter. I still managed to save the family in a way, because after that day I became a music hall entertainer. Bert and his blubbering bucket. There were posters everywhere. "Come and see Blubbering Bert and his 12 blubbering brothers fill buckets with tears." We wept into buckets on stage all over Ireland. People would come from miles around to see us. We even toured to Paris, and some guy in a beret painted a big picture of me smiling. We all cried happily ever after, though nobody ever found out what happened to Rosemary, and I never did eat another pork pie.